Hey guys, Nikki here. Today I wanted to talk about embryo transfers because we've had a couple of different attempts now and I feel like I know much more about it than I used to. Thought it would be really helpful to share it with those of you that are also going through IVF or may in the future. Now, if you are not familiar with my journey, I've got some other videos on my channel that you may want to check out, but the short version is we're doing IVF to avoid some genetic issues. But I did learn some things through this transfer process that tell me that I might have ended up here anyway, but we'll get into that as, you know, the video goes on. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so I think the best place to start here is just what even happens when you're going through the process of an embryo transfer. And keep in mind, this is just based on my own experience. I'm not a medical professional in any way, so don't take this as like, this is definitely what will happen to you. So in all of the different attempts that I've had, it's kind of started out with being on birth control, and then if I haven't done one recently, they'll do a saline sonogram. And so what happens with a saline sonogram is they'll inject saline into your uterus, and it allows them to take kind of a better quality image of what your uterus looks like. What they've looked for in me specifically, and again, I don't know if this is common for everyone, but they look for things like scar tissue that could prevent an embryo from being able to attach once it's inside of you. Now, when we were attempting our very first transfer, we determined during that saline sonogram that there was scar tissue that they actually needed to clean out. So they gave me a call and said, hey, let's do a hysteroscopy, which is basically going in and cleaning out that scar tissue before we attempt anything. Now, that is a procedure that they put you under anesthesia for. In my case, at least that time, they did it in the doctor's office. Like there's a small surgery center within my doctor's office. I didn't have to like go to a hospital or anything. It was outpatient. After the procedure, you wait a couple of weeks for everything to heal up, and then starting, I think, your next period, you can try to do the whole transfer thing again. So our very first attempt got delayed. So once I was ready to start actually trying to do the transfer, they started me on injectable estrogen and baby aspirin. And now when I did the egg retrieval process, all of my shots were in my like stomach area. For the transfer, they were all on my glute. So just to kind of give you an idea, they're kind of more located here. Much more awkward spot. And it hurt a bit more, I would say, than the egg retrieval process, but not so much with the estrogen specifically, but just being honest. And then as you get closer and closer to the point where you can actually do a transfer, they're gonna be checking your lining to make sure that it's thickening properly. I believe they like to see it over 7 millimeters. And then once you get to that point, then they will kind of clear you for the transfer, start you on the progesterone, and then you're on that for, I want to say it's like 4 or 5 days, and then you actually do the transfer and see if the embryo takes. Once you do your transfer, you stay on whatever medications that you are told to by your doctor, and you wait about 10 days, and then they do a pregnancy test. And it's a blood pregnancy test, so that they can catch everything really early and measure the HCG levels. And hopefully all is well, you get pregnant, and then again, they follow you up until the heartbeat appointment, which is like the 6 or 7 week mark. And I believe my specific clinic says that they run care all the way through the 10-week mark. And that's typically when they kind of cut things off and tell you to see your regular OBGYN. Sorry for the drastic change in lighting. It was getting like blindingly bright. I'm still getting some, but I'm gonna try to stick with this spot. A couple things I'll also just note at the gate. The progesterone, when you add it in, is another shot that goes kind of in your glute. That one for me hurt a lot until I figured out a good system. I tried a lot of different things. The regimen that worked for me really, really well, and I only discovered it during our latest attempt, is we would, first of all, I did all of my injections this go around, and I think it worked better. There was something about how tense I would get when my husband would do the shots because I knew that they were gonna hurt. Whereas I could kind of force myself to relax and do them myself really well. I would basically take that foot off the ground as much as possible. I would like leave a toe on for balance, but I would actually throw on some music, wait for a good downbeat, do the shot at the downbeat. And then as soon as I took the needle out, I would massage the area pretty intensely with my thumb, or really I would have my husband do it because he would have better leverage to kind of massage with his knuckles or with his thumb. And we would massage it for about 3 minutes, basically wait for the song to finish and go a little bit into the next song. And then I would immediately go and sit on a heating pad. I experimented with like doing a little bit of like exercise afterwards. I experimented with like different positions when my husband would do the shots, but really those were the big things that worked. Actually, sorry, one more thing that worked was also heating up the progesterone before we started. So either putting it in my bra, or what I actually started doing more recently was tucking it underneath my underarm, like inside my shirt after I prepped the shot. And that heated it up pretty quickly. I only needed like a couple minutes before it felt like it was ready to go. And I went from, during the first time I did those progesterone shots, being in constant pain for, I would say, about however long I was doing them, a couple of weeks, to this last go around, I basically had almost no pain throughout the whole process, which was really, really cool. I'm so glad I figured it out, and I really want everyone to know what I did in case it works for you. So let's talk about the first actual transfer that we did. So after the hysteroscopy, we started the estrogen, and they were tracking to see how my lining was building. And basically my lining was getting thicker, but it wasn't getting to that 7 millimeter mark. I want to say it's been a hot minute, but I want to say it was hovering around like the 4.5, 5 mark. And we were adjusting the estrogen. You know, I was using like pill estrogen as well as the injectable estrogen, and it just never really seemed to go high enough. We did 2 or 3 lining checks, and then they finally called it and said, like, we don't think that it's going to get thick enough this time around, which was really frustrating. But I was like, okay, it's good to know that that can happen. I think all of this time, I, for some reason, believed that with an embryo transfer, you can kind of like plan out when you want to get pregnant. It always felt like it was going to be the easy part of the whole process. I have no idea why, but it always just seemed like, oh, we just, you know, do some medications, pop an embryo in, and boom, you're pregnant. And I guess I just have underestimated the science at every point in IVF, and also just maybe not even the science, but the art that is IVF, because it just, there's a lot more like nuance and tweaking it and nature and everything that goes into this. And it's just a lot more difficult than I expected. So I was honestly really, really frustrated when we were not able to go through with that first transfer. But of course, like, I wanted the best chance for success. So I'm glad that they called it if we weren't going to have a successful transfer. But again, complicated emotions that are hard to really describe if you're not going through it. So after that first attempt, we kind of ran into timing with the holidays where there was an office closure, and then we finally were able to get started back up in the early part of the year. And then of course you go through the whole process again of like starting the birth control, waiting for a period, and then, you know, you start taking the estrogen again and all of this stuff. And I remember we started going through the same pattern of my lining, like making progress, but not quite enough progress. And I got through my second lining check, and they were like, yeah, it's like really not thickening. You know, your nurse will tell you what to do, but you know, this is where you're at. And I'll be honest, I remember this day very clearly, going into the office, coming in like late to a meeting, and just being super upset, to the point where like people noticed and like kind of checked in with me after, because they could tell that something was off. And I was a mess, because I was like, this is my second attempt at this. I know it's gonna get canceled. I know. Because this is exactly what happened last time. And it was really frustrating. It actually ended up being that they decided to kind of continue with the meds and give it a little bit more time. And then it got to a point where they were comfortable enough with going through with the transfer, which I was genuinely surprised by. So that was the first time that I had started on the progesterone. And it hurt so badly. So as I was saying earlier in the video with the progesterone, I mean, I tried a lot of different things, and It hurt to sit down, it hurt to stand, it hurt to walk. I felt like no matter what I did, I was in constant, significant pain before I kind of figured out what worked for me. And I'll be honest, I think in that first transfer attempt, like I don't think I ever really figured it out. I was just starting to discover some things that worked towards the end, but it was tough. So we got to the pregnancy test appointment and they tested. They called me and they were like, hey, so it's positive, but your HCG is really low. Like we don't know if this is going to be viable. We're going to repeat the test in a couple of days, but like on paper it's positive. And then basically the HCG like never rose on the second test, and so they were like, we're going to keep following your HCG down to 0, but like we're like, this is definitely a miscarriage, so you can stop your medications. Now, we talked with my doctor about it for a while afterwards. Like what could go wrong? Because I get that there could be kind of a number of things that would go wrong. What we were told is because the embryo did attach and we did start seeing that HCG level rise, that's a good sign. It means the embryo did implant. It just like immediately stopped growing. So it was likely some sort of issue with the embryo that they can't catch with the PGTA and PGTM testing. If you don't know what that is, watch some of my previous videos because I go over what all of that is. It's the testing that you can do on frozen embryos before using them to help decide which ones make sense to use. So after that failed attempt, they wanted me to take some time to have my body, obviously have the HCG go to 0, but also just kind of like reset. Before we tried to do another transfer, my doctor suggested that we do another saline sonogram because it had been, at this point, almost 6 months since I had done the previous one. So we're like, okay, no problem. And when they did that, they found scar tissue. And so the first time when they found scar tissue, it kind of made sense because, you know, first of all, I'd never had a saline sonogram done before, but I had a pregnancy before, like I have a daughter. So it's very possible that basically there would be scar tissue from whenever I, gave birth to her, that just stuff never fully cleared out. But it was weird that they found scar tissue this second time because between that first saline sonogram and now, the only pregnancy that I had was this one that was like, a couple of days a week where there shouldn't have been any scarring because there was no like significant growth or trauma to my uterus. So they were like, that's really weird. We actually want you to go get this evaluated by a different doctor. They recommended a few different people that more specialize in this type of thing. And they wanted me to have a hysteroscopy with one of them in a hospital setting with different equipment where they could like do a more, thorough job cleaning out the scar tissue. Now, I ended up finding like a boutique doctor in the area who fit me in like immediately. It was mind-blowingly fast. I think I actually ended up getting the surgery done like the same week that they recommended that I do it, just so we could like kind of expedite the process. And again, even that doctor who'd seen it before was kind of stumped. He was like, there's not a clear reason why you would have had the scar tissue. This is where there's kind of a blessing in disguise, maybe of us having to do IVF, because basically my understanding is that scar tissue, whether or not it was the reason why that first embryo didn't attach, I don't know. I will never know, right? But my doctor told me that it's very possible that if I've got a recurring scar tissue problem, or even just that first scar tissue that they cleaned out, that might have prevented me from getting pregnant. So if I was under normal circumstances, most people don't engage a fertility doctor until they've been trying for like 6 to 12 months, depending on your age. And I might have been like trying and being disappointed month after month before engaging a doctor, and then they might have found that. Whereas, we're still very far into our IVF journey. I want to say we're, at the time of filming this, like around 2 years in, so it's not short, but who knows? In the end, it may have actually saved me time. Who knows? So again, I wasn't expecting to learn that. In a weird way, it kind of gave me some comfort because I think all this time I've been so frustrated with the fact that I even have to do all of this to feel like I can get a healthy child at the end. But in this case, it was like, well, maybe I would have had to do it anyway. even if I wasn't going about it for the genetic reasons. So anyways, it just made me think, and it was interesting to learn that. I had a friend that kind of learned something similar with her IVF journey, of like discovering something that she had no idea was even a problem. And it just goes to show, like, you just never really know what life's gonna throw at you, honestly. So after I got the second hysteroscopy, I had to wait a little bit longer than the first time around. The reason being, they purposely did a different recovery process. This time they put a balloon in that helped kind of prop open my uterus. The way that my surgery doctor explained it was, if you get cuts on like 2 of your fingers and then you put a Band-Aid around them, kind of like this, they're gonna like fuse together, and then it's gonna like create more scar tissue if you ever have to like pull them apart, like you're gonna have to like heal all over again. He basically said it's possible that with my first hysteroscopy, because they didn't prop it open and like kind of allow it to kind of heal everywhere on its own, it's possible that areas kind of like folded over on each other and like caused some of that scar tissue to come back. So to be extra safe, they put a balloon in. That was in there for about a week. And then after that point, they wanted me to kind of wait another 3 weeks. So in total, it was about a month after my hysteroscopy before I could try anything with IVF again. I will say the balloon was so uncomfortable. Not the balloon itself. There was like a bottom part of the balloon that had like some little like nubs on it that would like rub in weird places. And y'all, I don't know if it's just because my doctor was a man and he didn't seem to understand that like that hurt and was very uncomfortable, because I don't feel like he totally like heard me when I said how uncomfortable it was. He kind of wrote it off. But whatever, I think I'm in good shape now. So right after that waiting period after the hysteroscopy, we couldn't actually do a transfer because I had an existing trip booked that would have jacked up the timeline. So we attempted a transfer back in July. You know, went through the whole process, the estrogen, the progesterone, all the other drugs they give you, like the antibiotics and like everything else. So you did the transfer, took a pregnancy test, and it was positive. The HCG level was significantly higher than the first time. I think with the first transfer, the HCG at that first blood pregnancy test was only about 10. And the second time it was at like 90. So I just Googled it and it says between 50 and 100. So it's good. But yeah, so even though this was significantly better than last time, I had in my head, like, I have no idea how good it is. I know that the trending is what matters more. So when they did the second test, the HCG basically like didn't really rise. I don't remember the exact number, but they told me like, we think it's another chemical. We need to continue your meds just to be safe, but we don't really know. We're not expecting it to work out. So my husband and I were obviously really bummed. We kept going with the meds. I remember doing them angrily because I was like, what's the point? Like, just doing this, like, nothing's gonna happen anyway. And I go in a few days later. So keep in mind, I think the first pregnancy test was like a Thursday, and then they retested me on Monday, and then they tested me again, I think on the next Thursday. And they were like, so actually your HCG shot up, and it basically like changed the amount that they would have expected. So we're like, this might actually be a viable pregnancy. We don't know. It could be great. It could be an ectopic. Like, we don't really know. So we're going to go in and we're going to test you again in a couple of days. And basically I had a few tests where it kept climbing. And I was starting to get, it might have been in my head. It might have been symptoms from the meds, but I was starting to get really like huge waves of fatigue, the way that I remember getting when I was pregnant with my daughter, and like super mild, like heartburny nausea, which again was what I had with my daughter. So I was like, maybe I am really pregnant. I mean, like I knew I was really pregnant, but like, I was like, maybe it is actually gonna stick. I don't know. They knew that we were leaving town pretty soon, which is why they wanted to make sure that they were checking things a little bit more. So we ended up going in at the 6-week mark. I think normally they would have waited a little bit longer, but they knew that we were leaving the country. And so they wanted to kind of get as much information as they could before we left. So at the 6-week mark, everything was measuring closer to 5 weeks, which is not great, but it's not the end of the world. It could end up being fine. It just really depends on how things continue to trend. Now, when we went in for the 7-week appointment, that was when they definitely should have seen a heartbeat, and they didn't. It wasn't even just that they didn't see a heartbeat. What they saw was basically an empty sac that the meds were growing, which was really, really hard. They were like, this is, you know, basically a miscarriage. They actually had a fancier term for it that I think was more specific, where it's basically like the embryo is just MIA. And really what was special about our situation was, I want to say this appointment was on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and we were leaving the country on Tuesday, midday. And so I had never been through a miscarriage. I didn't know what it was like. And they were like, we're actually going to recommend that you take like a drug that's often used to terminate a pregnancy, because we would rather you process this miscarriage, like have your body flush everything out while you're still here, rather than risk that happening while you're on the plane or just abroad. Because if you have any sort of complications, like it's better for you to have doctors that like speak your same language and like, you know, that can like work with you on what to do next. So I did that the next day, and it was a really awful experience. I mean, I don't think my experience was particularly awful compared to like any woman that's going through it, but it was a lot more mentally and physically taxing than I expected. So what happened was, I took the medication first thing in the morning when I woke up. Within, I want to say like an hour or two, I started to get a lot of cramping. Couldn't really walk around. I ended up being in bed a lot of the day. And then very, you know, well, I wouldn't say like very heavy bleeding, like not concerningly heavy, but just, you know, when you go to the bathroom and you see that much blood, it's a lot. I would compare it to kind of like if you've ever had a baby, like the kind of bleeding that you get after giving birth, where it is just, it's constant, but you're not like soaking through a pad an hour or anything like that. Like that's where it would be more concerning. Also, sorry, my cat just really needs attention, so I'm going to give him scratchies. You want to say hi? The other one is asleep behind the camera. But yeah, and also just emotionally, I was a wreck. I was really upset. I really thought that this one was going to work out. The camera moved because my SD card got full. I felt like so many hopes and dreams got like dashed in a moment with finding that out. And it was really devastating. And luckily we had a trip, again, that was actually, it was a long trip out of the country that was a great distraction from all of it. That helped kind of let us heal a bit out, like away from having to talk about it a lot. But it was hard. It was really hard. I think the biggest thing that I would just tell anyone that's thinking about going through IVF is that like you just don't know what the process is going to look like at all until you go through it. I think I just thought it would be easier. I think I thought it would be pretty straightforward, and it was more of like a guarantee that it would work. And I get that that's not what the doctor told me. Like the doctor was very honest about the odds of like stuff working out and all of that. But I want to say if you've got like high quality embryos like we had, and if you don't have like other major complications, theoretically transfers should work like 60-65% of the time. And so we are definitely in the minority of people that it hasn't worked for yet. I think our doctor said about 20% of people are not pregnant after their second transfer. I'm just trying to remain hopeful that a third one will work. I don't really know how to feel about it. Sorry, my cat's like giving himself a bath. I just want to be more hopeful again. And if I'm being honest, like I think it like wrecked my confidence in the process a little bit. The first transfer, I cannot tell you why. I just had a feeling it wasn't going to work. This one, I really, like, I felt in my gut like it was going to work. And so I think that's why it was like an extra gut punch when it didn't. Because I was so excited. But I mean, that's life. Like sometimes stuff just doesn't work out. I am not the only person I know, even this month, that has had a miscarriage. And it was like a friend of mine. But I'm going to keep sharing my journey and my experience with you all for as long as you're willing to listen. I think it's helpful for me. it makes me feel like I'm going through this for some sort of bigger purpose besides myself, whether that's true or not. It's not like there's a lot of you out there that are watching these videos, but I think like for those of you that are and that are supportive and thinking of us, I really appreciate it. And I also genuinely hope that this helps someone else that's going through IVF, whether it's for the same reasons as we are or their own, because it is not as easy as I think we want to believe. Also, I know that insurance season is coming up, and if you're not sure if you have IVF insurance, you should look into it. You may not think that you need it. You never know what'll happen. Like again, we never thought that we would need it, but we did. A lot of times if companies do offer IVF coverage, it's through like a special secondary insurance. So in my case, I have Progeny. I actually did a whole video on how their insurance works, and I'll link that here on the end screen. But a lot of people's election benefits timeline is coming up. And so if you are thinking that you may need IVF, it's probably worth looking into whether you or your significant other have coverage that you could take advantage of that you may not even be aware of. For us, I think it has saved us between $50,000 and $60,000 to have that insurance. So it's definitely worth fully exploring if you haven't already. Thank you for sticking around this long. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I promise not all of my videos are about, IVF, but these are real issues that impact, women like me. On this channel, I like to talk about how I leverage those resources a little bit differently than someone who might be in a different stage of life or a different financial position. So I hope that you'll stick around and enjoy more videos of mine. But even if you're just here for now, I really appreciate your time. And thank you for watching this video. And I hope to see you in a future one.